Hello. Okay, my microphone is now on. I don't know why I have to keep adding my microphone back. The overlay is the same. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's stream. This is going to be a short one because I have a number of things that I need to do today, including taking care of the dog and dinner and prep for Valaward. But since I've been talking about the WGA strike previously, as you can see from up here, and now we have SAG-AFTRA on strike, as you can see here, plus the long post thread that I did on Twitter and Blue Sky yesterday talking about how strike stuff relates to what's going on with authors and pressures that we're facing, and the question that I hear often and have asked, why aren't authors unionized, or why can't authors unionize? And I thought that this would be a good time to fold all of those together and talk a bit about how everything relates here. Big disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer. I am not an active union scholar or legal representation, so I'm just talking for me here and my understanding of how things work. So if you hear something and you go, oh, I talked to a labor lawyer and they disagree with you, there's a good chance that that labor lawyer is right and I'm wrong. So, disclaimer out of the way. I'll talk about and share what I know. So, important stuff up front. I am going to... Let's see. Great. I'm just going to throw some links into the chat here. This is a WGA landing page with a lot of information about WGA's response to the SAG-AFTRA strike. And we have... Oh, nope, that's a thing that you need a login for. There is the entertainment support fund, which I will try to find a link for. I'm going to go back to the SAG-AFTRA strike site. So SAG-AFTRA now has a strike, kind of strike center website. Where is... All right. So the Entertainment Community Fund can be found here. So that is some... Let's get an actual... Do I have the SAG-AFTRA site? Great. So I've got, with all of those in place, just so that folks have links to follow if they would like. WGA, if you don't already know, is the Writers Guild of America. That covers screenwriters and... so screenwriters for film and television in the USA. Not all television of every type there necessarily, because I think animation, well, no, animation writing should be another same thing. Animation acting is a different thing. So Hollywood has guilds and unions in a way that a lot of other entertainment industries don't have because of really specific historical circumstances in U.S. history. I don't know all of that history. In fact, I know not very much of that history, because most of what I know about U.S. labor organizing is actually more recent because of a reading group that I did a couple of years ago on contemporary labor history in the U.S. So I don't know as much about the founding of the guilds and the guild era. I think that any number of WGA members who have been doing podcasts and interviews in the last, 2 or 3 months as there's been a strike, they're going to be a better source for the history of guilds and unions in Hollywood than I can be. So WGA is the Writers Guild. They have been on strike since May-ish. I think 11 weeks. I've seen 11 weeks of picketing is what they're up to. And SAG-AFTRA is the Screen Actors Guild American Film, Television, Radio Association, I believe, if I'm... fact for members, what's the actual name stand for? But SAG-AFTRA is an actors guild. And they just started going on strike this week. They had previously voted at about 98% for strike approval, and what that means is that all the card-carrying members of SAG-AFTRA got a message saying, "Hey, do you vote to authorize the negotiating group for SAG-AFTRA, the group that goes and negotiates a contract with AMPTP, the American Motion Picture Television Producers, like that group." Hello, Alphabet Streams. I may be getting the acronym on AMPTP wrong in terms of like the actual unpacked words, because I don't have that whole thing written in front of me. But that group, AMPTP, is Netflix, Amazon, Apple Studios, Paramount, Disney, so on and so forth. The biggest TV and film production companies, the companies that own all of those studios. So SAG-AFTRA has a contract with AMPTP, which is a like organizing group that represents all of those studios and companies. And they renegotiate their contract every 3 years. WGA does this every 3 years. SAG-AFTRA does this every 3 years. The Directors Guild of America does it every 3 years. They actually came to a deal between when WGA started their strike and now. Yeah, no worries, Alphabet Streams. I'm sorry that I haven't been able to make many of your streams because, as with you, timing becomes difficult. But I'm very glad to have you here, and please chime in on anything from whatever you've been doing in terms of following WGA, SAG-AFTRA, or other like labor stuff. I'm going to get into talking about author things. I just want to lay the groundwork with the current strikes first, real quick. So SAG-AFTRA voted overwhelmingly to approve a strike if the negotiating group for SAG-AFTRA was not able to come to an agreement with AMPTP. And so that the negotiations broke down or kind of did not reach a conclusion when SAG-AFTRA's contract ran out. And so the board like voted to implement the strike authorization. And so SAG-AFTRA is on strike as of yesterday afternoon at like, I guess, 3 p.m. EDT, to the point where actors who were at the Oppenheimer film premiere in London apparently walked out of the theater, having already done the red carpet and gone inside to sit for the premiere of the film. They got up and left because when SAG-AFTRA is on strike, actors are not allowed to do promotional work for projects with a struck company. So a struck company is a company that you're on strike against, is my understanding. So I was a member of a union when I was in grad school, but I was not active in like organizing or militancy because that union was in a very different position because it's a grad school union, like a grad student union, and there was not a big fight while I was there and a member. So I am a member of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association. The Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association is notably not a union or a guild for reasons that we're going to get to in a couple of minutes. So WGA has been on strike for a number of weeks. They've been picketing locations of AMPTP productions. And if you're not familiar with how picketing works, the National Labor Relations Act, which is a labor law that was passed in the USA in 1935, carves out specific activities that a union is allowed to do, and that in doing, they can create certain legal restrictions in action, is my understanding. So if WGA is on strike against Netflix, which is one of the companies that they're on strike against, WGA members and their affiliates can form a picket line, which is just a line of humans that blocks the entrance to a studio. And unions like IATSE, the Teamsters Union, are allowed to say, well, I'm not going to cross this picket line. Picket lines are meant to be disruptive. The point is to disrupt business and to prevent the companies that the group is striking from being able to operate normally, right? The writers aren't on set. The writers are not turning in drafts. The writers are not doing like post-production work. They're not developing shows. They're not breaking seasons. They're trying to grind down productions to a halt so that the struck companies under AMPTP lose money to the point where they come back to the table and negotiate in good faith. WGA has a whole list of the things that they have asked for just on their website, and I expect that SAG-AFTRA already has that or will have it very soon, just so that anybody who is curious about what's happening can go to their website and go, oh, okay, this specifically are the types of things that the writers or the actors are asking for, and in some cases it gives really clear specifics. Writers are asking for this much higher percentage in residuals on XYZ. They're asking for restrictions on how AI/language learning models are used in Hollywood. Like, they get the specifics here, there, and everywhere. So strikes are meant to be disruptive. They are meant to be loud and to be noisy, be in the company's face. They are meant to be a big road bump. And so this reminds me of a lot of discourse that I saw in the 2010s about the movement for Black Lives and protests kind of in that movement. So Black Lives Matter and kind of, I don't know the lines between movement for Black Lives and Black Lives Matter, so I'm going to be talking about them in totality because it's for other people to make those differentiations. I'm not in any position to do that. So protests in that movement overall were disruptive, and people are like, oh, they're, I have to get to work, or any of that kind of stuff. It's the same arguments that companies and bosses have used against strikes and picket lines previously. The same arguments elsewhere in civil rights that were used against like kitchen sit-ins and things like that in the US civil rights movement. Part of what this action is, this kind of direct action is supposed to do is be disruptive, because if it's not disruptive, it's easy for people to ignore, and there's no cost. WGA members are not making money because they're not working. Like right now, their job is being on strike. And so there is pain to the group that is striking. And they're hoping to inflict greater pain on the other party so that that party will be the one to come back to the table and say, okay, well, let's revisit some of these things that I wasn't going to budge on earlier. And so now, not only are the writers on strike, where writers weren't on set, writers weren't turning in scripts, writers weren't working with editors on, additional shoots or editing or anything like that. Writers aren't promoting their projects. Now the actors are on strike as well. So any shoots that were active even without a writer closed down because SAG-AFTRA is on strike. Any additional shoots, second unit shoots, any of that stuff closed down because SAG-AFTRA is on strike. There are parts of television that are not covered by AMPTP, and actors are not required to kind of picket or stay home from those productions. Notably, a SAG-AFTRA strike does mean that those actors are forbidden from promoting their projects. And so if there was like a Wheel of Time season 2 panel at San Diego Comic-Con, members of SAG-AFTRA are not going to attend that panel because that is promoting a project. The writers won't go and promote, and the actors won't go and promote. This may mean that at San Diego Comic-Con and other cons, they, what was going to be a cast discussion gets turned into like a screening, right? Because the company still wants to do everything they can to get the promotional oomph out of the work. And from the writers and the actor's perspective, they would rather be working. They would rather be able to promote work that they're proud of, but they are making the sacrifice to withhold their kind of ongoing work and ongoing support from projects that they largely believe in and are passionate about and would make them more money would make them money if they were kind of, more involved. It is a guild coming together and saying, we are going to collectively make a sacrifice in order to inflict pain on this other party so that they will come back to the negotiating table in good faith. So that's just a bit of an overview of the WGA and SAG-AFTRA strikes as I understand them, including some like strike tactics and things. If, for instance, say, AMPTP came to the SAG-AFTRA negotiating group, in 1 week and say, okay, let's come back to the table. We're ready to revisit insert name of some topic that had been part of why the negotiations broke down. The guild negotiating team and the AMPTP team negotiate, and if they come to a tentative agreement, the guild will then take that agreement back to their membership, and the membership votes on whether to accept it. That's my understanding of how this works. And so generally, my understanding is that the negotiating group has a sense of what is and isn't a red line for the membership based on being the ones who are doing the negotiating and having a sense of where the membership is. Sometimes you might get a tentative agreement that doesn't get the support of the membership. So it's not a guarantee that once the groups come back to the table, we're going to end up with an agreement that ends the strike. I don't know how frequently the WGA and or SAG-AFTRA negotiating groups are meeting or will be meeting with the AMPTP teams. That's just beyond my level of knowledge of how this operates. If you want more information about the WGA side, I am going to pull up the Twitter account of writer and actor Adam Conover, who is I believe he's a member of both the WGA board and a member of the negotiating committee right now. And he has done a number of interviews talking about WGA, about WGA's history and Hollywood's history as a union town, and some of the things that that the WGA is fighting for in terms of better conditions and better terms. So you can go and check out stuff that Adam is doing. If you want information and you're on like Blue Sky or Threads or Twitter or these social sites, look for people that have captain in their name or in their bio. So Adam Conover is a WGA board member. So a board member or a captain or something like that. Those are more likely to be people who are higher up the organizational and operational chain in carrying out the strike. And so they're going to be tapped into a lot of information that they can share, right? So with all that said, WGA's on strike. They're writers. Why don't authors have a union? Like I said, union activity in the USA depends on the National Labor Relations Act and a oversight group called the National Labor Relations Board, NLRB. If you hear people talking about an NLRB election, like at Starbucks locations or at Amazon fulfillment centers, the NLRB, an election via NLRB is the official process by which a group says, hey, we're unionizing and we would like the protections under the National Labor Relations Act, right? It is the official legal cross your T's and dot your I's way of making a union. In the National Labor Relations Act and or interpretations or rulings on it, to the best of my understanding, again, not a lawyer, authors can't unionize because instead of becoming employees of the publishing companies, if I make a contract with a imprint of Penguin Random House, one of the big five, the largest publishers in the USA and the world, if I sign a contract to license a book to them, I am licensing that work, that intellectual property. I am not selling it to them outright. I'm granting them a license to publish it, some set of rights. I'm licensing them those rights. That does not make me an employee of that publishing company. And what that means is that I, as an author, am regarded by this legal framework as being a competitor to every other author who works in the same space. So I just got some books by people that I know to one degree or another. So The Dawn Hounds by Sasha Stronach and The Bone Shard Daughter by Andrea Stewart, which just happened to be here. I'm excited to read both of these. Via labor law, those writers are regarded as my competition. I don't regard my colleagues as my competition in a practical manner. There may be only so many publishing slots in a given publisher's catalog, but really what I am competing against as an author is I'm competing against poverty, where people don't have enough money to buy books. I am competing against precarity, where people are not in a living situation where they have time to read books or a safe place to read books. I am in competition with to some degree other media, like the idea that people would spend their leisure time on things other than reading a little bit. But the first two, precarity and poverty, I view as much more my actual competition or enemy in terms of, some part of the world that is my competition. I sometimes have problems with publishing companies or retailers where we are in an antagonistic or anti-competitive relationship where some publisher or some retailer will exert their market share to bend the industry to their will in a way that is disadvantageous to me. But according to the National Labor Relations Act and current U.S. labor law, to the best of my understanding, again, please don't take this as legal advice, if I got together with a bunch of authors in SIFWA and we all went to Penguin Random House and said, here are the minimum terms if you want to sign a contract with any of us, that would be regarded as collusion. We would be seen as a cartel, and we would be the ones who the federal government would come after. Does that make a lot of sense to you? That me and a number of other authors in science fiction fantasy, which is a fairly popular but not 100% juggernaut bestseller category, because every category has bigger authors and authors that are not as that don't sell as much, even if the work is as good or better, based on your various rubrics and aesthetics. I, as an author who has sold a number of books and have never been a New York Times bestseller, have never been a Hugo or Nebula Award winner, that if I got together with a bunch of other authors who make about minimum wage per year on their writing or less, if we got together to try to organize for better terms and conditions with Penguin Random House, we would be the ones at fault in the law. So right now, the answer to why aren't authors unionizing is we are legally forbidden from doing so in the USA. Now, I will note, without giving anybody any suggestions, that labor action didn't start in 1935 after the National Labor Relations Act was passed, right? Labor history extends in the USA decades and decades prior to the passage of the National Labor Relations Act. So a bunch of people in the 1930s and earlier did a bunch of stuff with no legal protections or stuff that was illegal as they were taking collective action, as they were engaged in direct action in pickets or sit-ins or any of those other types of labor actions trying to collectively bargain. So if we look at labor history, having the federal government on your side is not a requirement to even attempt labor action. And for a lot of people for a long time, there was no hope of the federal government coming to their aid. And in fact, there are times in labor history where we can look at groups like the Pinkertons or or other private security being brought in by bosses and managers and companies to just kill labor workers, to kill labor organizers, to just do violence. And in a number of cases, the state or federal government was like, we're not going to get in the way, or we're going to support the bosses. So in a lot of ways, the National Labor Relations Act was a huge victory for labor in the USA because it involved the federal government at least saying that they were going to take labor's side within certain circumstances, right? If you do everything according to the rules that we set up in this law, theoretically the federal government is going to protect you and is going to have your back. So authors don't have that. The Writers Guild of America does because of particular historical circumstances when that guild was formed. You'll notice that WGA and SAG-AFTRA and DGA, these are guilds. Guilds are not exactly the same as unions. I can't really talk through the legal differences of that, but there are different permutations and exact versions of these things, right? So we could end up with a modified version of U.S. labor law that would allow freelancers in the publishing industry, that allow authors like me to collectively bargain, right? We figure out some way that the National Labor Relations Board feels would be fair, wouldn't be anti-competitive in a way that is like overall hurtful to the country and the people involved, right? Unions get to exist according to the National Labor Relations Act because enough legislators, pressured by enough people, said, we're going to put in protections because we find that without these protections, corporations and bosses have so much power that it causes net hurt to workers and or the country and or the communities that they're in. So if I and the membership of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association, and this would have to be specifically U.S. members, right? Because we're talking about U.S. labor law and the U.S. versions of publishing companies. The labor situation in other countries is different. I can't really speak to it. So we're going to talk about the USA, just like WGA and SAG-AFTRA are USA. If the law was changed, then SIFWA could register as a union, right? Or maybe a guild, or whatever a third thing would be under this revised labor law. And we could agitate for, minimum promotional support, or standards in communication and transparency, standards in royalty reporting, and access to other kinds of like sales data, minimum guaranteed promotional support, protected editorial revision timelines so that we could never be we could never be asked to turn around copy edits in a weekend, which is something that I have known author friends to be asked to do. It usually takes me between 20 and 40 hours to go through and complete a full cycle of turning around copy edits. So that would be like some of my colleagues being asked to do 40 hours of work in about 72 hours total. And that's like 40 hours, and then you have to fit in sleep and eating and everything else into that same 72, right? So it can be very ridiculous. So right now with U.S. labor law as it is, authors cannot unionize with legal protections, cannot conduct in collective bargaining over XYZ things in contract work. Here's what we can do in the publishing industry right now. HarperCollins has a union. HarperCollins union was on strike just this year, fighting for better wages, better conditions, and other things like that. There are not, to my knowledge, other unions in the big five publishing companies. There is not a union in Hachette. There is not a union in Penguin Random House. There is not a union in Macmillan. There is not a union in Simon & Schuster. And then HarperCollins is that fifth one, right? And they do have a union. But that union does not cover all of the workers who could be in a union, to my understanding, right? people at certain manager levels and above don't get to be in unions because they're management, not labor, according to the way that the U.S. law like codifies these things. So if workers at Penguin Random House today got together and reached the numbers that they needed to win a National Labor Relations Board election, they could unionize, and then they could start negotiating for a bunch of things. And so for me, I think the best way for authors to get toward the things that we would want from being able to unionize is to support publishing staff in unionizing, because a lot of the things that publishing staff would want would help authors. That would be things like a union could agitate for minimum staffing, right? The group negotiating for the publicity and like sales and editorial departments could say, okay, we're going to set, we want every publicist to have no more than 3 titles they're promoting in a given month, right? I have heard in the past decade plus of publicists being asked to promote 9 to 13 books, 9 to 13 individual titles in the same month, right? These are all titles releasing in this month. If you have 13 books to promote and you are one publicist, in 1 month you have 20 something working days. Let's say 21 working days. So you have 21 working days and 13 titles. So you are not able to do 2 full working days of promotion per book. You cannot even do 2 full work days of promoting a book that the publisher paid in advance for, that an editor edited, that somebody commissioned a cover for. Like, publishers put time and money into books, but things are so squeezed right now that now not all publicists are probably not being asked to promote 13 books a month. But the way that I have seen things move in publishing is people leave or there are layoffs, and then when there are new hires, there are not enough new hires to replace all the people that are fired or left. And so everybody who is still there has to do more work, or the list has to get smaller. But usually what happens is the staff, the workers, are asked to do more with less support and fewer colleagues, right? A publicity team of 5 becomes a publicity team of 4, and that publisher or that imprint puts out just as many books with a team of 4 versus a team of 5. And that means that those workers are being asked to do more without any extra compensation. And the authors who publish those books are getting less support from their publishing team. So agitating for minimum staffing or maximum workload would benefit the staff, protecting them from overwork, and would benefit authors in ensuring that the people who are supporting them are not having their attention divided too many different ways. They're going to be able to get more support on their individual work, and they're going to have support from workers that are not burned the hell out because they're being asked to do too many things. Editors. The entire time that I've been in publishing, the understanding that I have seen and heard is that editors do a bunch of work in the office by day, and they go home and then they read. And that reading is more work. The idea of editors that only have to work 40 hours a week is something that I am thoroughly unfamiliar with in the publishing industry. Every editor that I know in science fiction fantasy that I've talked to enough to get a sense of their workload and how they get by doing their job, they're putting in more like 50, 60, 70 hour weeks, right? They do 40 hours a week of basically project management, meetings and art briefs and internal presentations and contracts and so on and so forth. And then they read manuscripts at home at night or on the train or anything else that is not paid time, right? Because a lot of editors at Big Five houses are salaried employees. And so they're just expected to do all this overtime. Now, New York State labor law did change in the last decade or so to provide some recourse to publishing staff that were being asked to do more work. It's because of the pandemic, I haven't got to chat much with staff in informal settings to get a sense from people of how much has that law helped? How much of an impact does it make in terms of income, in terms of workload, or anything like that? But that's another thing that a union for a publishing company could argue about. You could argue for minimum promotional budgets for publicity and or marketing teams so that you don't end up in a situation where, okay, here's 2 books that get a lot of money over the course of this 6 months of releases, and then here's a bunch of books that get very, very little money in terms of promotional support that is given to them. So we have winners and losers, right? It's understandable that a publishing company who paid a bunch of money, a much bigger advance, would put more promotional money into that because they have more money that they need to recoup. But if there are no promotional minimums, then a publisher can do a more abusive version of what already happens very widely, which is the spaghetti on the wall method, right? A publishing company will sign a bunch of contracts for a bunch of different books. They'll pick and choose a few that they think are likely winners, and they'll put a lot of support behind them. And then they will do what, to me, in my opinion, is below the minimum standard of support, and hope that some of those books that they paid not very much for will blow up and be much more profitable than the amount of money that was thrown at them. If I'm an author and I get a publishing contract from a publisher, I expect that publisher to do the best job they can to support my book. I'm not expecting that every time I sell a contract, they're going to throw $1 million of promotional budget behind my book. But I do think that there are certain professional standards and professional minimums of support that a publisher that wants to be respected is going to do for every given book. And I have seen books get contracted and then really left to die on the vine. And whereas a publishing company can put out a dozen, several dozen, hundreds of books in a year, a lot of writers can only write one book in a year, or take 2 years to write a book. Even indie authors that write much faster, that's still a lot of time that you can't get back for anything else. And honestly, I think if you're an indie author and you're writing 12 books a year, there's a good chance that you are doing so much work that it's going to be hurting your health. People know their own lives and their own bodies and their own health more than I know other people's bodies and lives and health. But what I am seeing and hearing from folks that are fully in the independent space is people burning themselves out to keep on the rapid release treadmill. And so that brings me to the other thing. I think that indie authors need a union as much as traditional authors need a union. Because if I'm an indie-only author in a commercial genre, right? If I'm writing science fiction and fantasy in English, a huge percentage of my ebook sales are going to come on Amazon. And so if, for instance, Amazon decides to just close down my KDP account without any explanation, as I have heard happen to a number of writers over the last decade and plus, what's your recourse? If Amazon shuts down my KDP account today, what can I do? I go to my agent and I go, oh, what happened? We can try to find an email address or a phone number to talk to a human at Amazon. I don't know about y'all, but getting in touch with a human at Amazon has been incredibly difficult for me whenever I have a book problem or a publishing problem. I can send in a query or a request, but there's no direct phone line where I'm guaranteed to get a human on the other side because the company's so big. So if some popular self-published author logs into their KDP one morning and their account has been closed. They can't look at their sales. They may not get any more payments. Their books may be entirely taken off sale. And what are they going to do? They've just lost between 80 and 90 something percent of their income from ebooks. Well, what about audio? Good question. Audio has grown a lot in the last decade between the kind of the proliferation of smartphones and people being able to listen to like books on tape, audiobooks digitally in MP3 format in cars and things like that. What are the big players in audio? It's Audible and Amazon and then everybody else. Audible is an Amazon company. And so if Audible controls, let's say 60% of the audiobook market, I think it's probably more of the audio, at least the digital audiobook market. That's an Amazon company. So that's another company where they are legendarily obtuse and the processes for redress are legendarily obfuscated, right? It's hard to get a human to talk with you when you have a problem or doing anything with Amazon. That's been my experience, and that's what I hear from a lot of people. If instead there were an author's union and somebody's account got closed, ideally, if the union is able to do what a union should be able to do, the union is going to have a contact list for every major retailer, every major vendor that we're working with. I know that SIFWA has put time and effort into getting points of contact to be able to do this type of redress, even though SIFWA is not a union, because this type of stuff is not union activity that is forbidden in US law, right? Sending an email to somebody being like, hey, what's going on here? Like, that's not labor action that's illegal for authors to do, thankfully. And so SIFWA has tried to do this, and part of that is part of SIFWA's efforts to serve a broader set of writers in science fiction, fantasy, and kind of in the speculative fiction field, is by saying to independent authors, hey, we have spent this time in developing relationships with people at Amazon and Apple and Barnes & Noble and so on and so forth, so that there, if it is a problem, you can come to us and we can try to help you deal with whatever problem has emerged. If there's a full-on union, the membership in that group is probably going to be a lot larger than the membership in Science Fiction Fantasy Writers of America, because SIFA would have greater teeth, right? If there are federal legal protections and supports. And especially if that union represented both traditional authors and self-published authors, right? Because there's a lot of folks who do both, myself included. And in the late 2010s, a lot of the sales analyses that I saw said that the group of authors most likely to make the most money were hybrid authors, because there are places where traditional may make you more money and there are places where self-publishing may make you more money. And so ideally, an author's union would be an author's union by genre or by medium, right? If we had a national writers union that was a real union, because there is a national writers union, it just doesn't get to be an actual union in the way that WGA or IATSE or CWA or any other U.S. union that you can name. You know, again, there are some slight differences in like processes and how things are organized and incorporated and stuff like that. But if there was just one big writers union, and so there would be like NWU romance, NWU literary fiction, and NWU juvenile lit, right? In the way that there's Writers Guild of America West, Writers Guild of America East, or there is, you know, IATSE local and then the local union shop in your region. If we had a national writers union, and I am a member and I'm on the National Writers Union, like Amazon relationship team or whatever, and there's a problem for one of my members, I can go to that Amazon contact and say, hey, this is Mike Underwood with the National Writers Union, parentheses, unwritten, you know that we have like 50,000 members, right? End parentheses. That comma, and our working agreement on terms for ebook sales are coming up at the end of this year, right? You remember that part too? In the same way that if something's screwed over a WGA member, somebody in WGA could get in touch with whoever was, whatever company was involved, and bring to bear the reality that there are so many members of that guild, and that in Hollywood, all of the most popular writers of screenplays are WGA members. Basically, all of the biggest U.S. actors in TV and film are SAG-AFTRA members. And if you cross a union in a way where that union says, we're just not doing business with you, congrats, you've cut yourself off from the cream of the crop and the vast majority of the people working in that space, or some large percentage of the people working in that space, right? Because there are non-union acting jobs. The details of that, beyond my knowledge. But if we had a national writers union, there would be so much more recourse for anybody who got individually screwed over by something. There would be recourse for writers to be able to respond to, let's say, publishers refusing to put contract language into book contracts saying that the publisher is not going to feed this novel to a fiction generating language learning model / AI system. I'm seeing reports from authors that right now authors are fighting in contract negotiations to get language put into a contract that says that their work won't be, used to train like generative language learning models. And by generative, I mean models that then go and generate new fiction, right? If the contract said that a publisher could take the fiction that I'm licensing to them, publish it normally, and feed that whole text to a publisher scale, like novel AI type program where they could then just spit out new novels, that could be a problem for me. If I had the National Writers Union, that union would go and negotiate with all the big publishers. And so when the publishers try to change contract terms, as they have in the last few years, saying that instead of most advances in fiction being paid in thirds, 1/3 on signing, 1/3 on delivery and acceptance of the manuscript, which is you turn the novel in and you've either already done edits or the editor is like, cool, yeah, this is what we talked about and we're fine to go and do edits from here. We consider this delivered and accepted. That usually is 1/3 of the payment. And then the last third comes on publication. Now I'm hearing people getting contracts that say the advance is paid in fourths per book, 1 on signing, 1 on delivery and acceptance, 1 on publication, and then 1 6 months after publication or several months after publication. I will return to the fact that an advance is an advance against royalties. Advance. Money ahead of when the royalties are earned. If you get the last quarter of your advance 6 months after the book has been published, that's not an advance anymore, right? Because you're already earning royalties. The book is out. The book is selling to readers. But if I'm working with my agent and trying to sell a book to a big 5 publishing house, and every publishing house now has in their boilerplate that advances are paid in fourths, what are my options? My agent can go to the mat for it, and I can tell my agent, if they don't budge on this, we walk, and we can follow through on that threat. But losing a contract is going to hurt me more than it's going to hurt a publisher. And that's the case for so many authors, but only individually, right? If a national writers union negotiated with Penguin Random House saying that advances must be paid out in thirds, and then Random House is like, no, we're doing fourths now. And the National Writers Union is like, okay, cool, we're not going to sell books to you. And then thousands of writers are not selling books to Penguin Random House. Stephen King is not selling books to Penguin Random House. Let's name the top 5 Penguin Random House authors. If all of them are in the National Writers Union, then NWU or whatever national union we end up with withholds those books, then Penguin Random House is going to have a bad time, right? If Barack and Michelle Obama, the former president and the former first lady of the United States, who are Penguin Random House authors, were to join a national writers union, the next time that they went to do a contract with Penguin Random House, the union, their contract terms would in some ways at least be informed by the negotiations between that union and Penguin Random House. This is not to say that if we had a national writers union that every author would only ever get the same contract terms. There's always going to be differences, right? Different shows and different actors are paid different amounts. But with a guild or a union, you can raise the floor to a level that makes that profession more of a, something that can get you a living wage, where you can support yourself and ideally a family or, the people that are important in your life that you want to be able to financially support on that wage as that career. Being a television writer for a number of decades has been a decent but not extravagant middle-class career. It's gotten harder and harder. It's gotten worse and worse for writers, as I hear from WGA folks. I saw a statistic yesterday, and I haven't been able to find the documentation for it, so I cannot guarantee that it's accurate. But the person who shared it says they're an actor. That tweet claimed that 87% of SAG-AFTRA members do not make enough money every year to qualify for a SAG-AFTRA healthcare plan. That number is under 27,000 USD per year. 27,000 USD per year is not a lot of money. That's not a living wage in most of the country. It's certainly not a good wage in Southern California. So even with a guild, there have been problems, and that's part of why SAG-AFTRA is striking, right? Because things have gotten untenable. Things got a little worse, things got a little worse, things got a little worse. We had the writer's strike in 2008 into 2009 to try to get some better terms about streaming services. My understanding is that residuals for actors for streaming are also really bad in the way that residuals for writers are. Also, there's the fact that for writers and actors, publishing company the publishing companies, these networks are just pulling shows from streaming services entirely, right? I don't think anybody can watch Star Trek Discovery on Paramount Plus right now. That's a Paramount Plus show. That was debuted onto Paramount Plus. There are Disney Plus shows that debuted only on Disney Plus, and you just can't watch them anymore. If nobody's watching them, nobody's getting residuals from them. It's just gone, and nobody else can put that out. The company has to license that work out. And so WGA is striking, and so SAG-AFTRA is striking, and so the HarperCollins unions struck earlier this year. But I cannot go to the SIFWA membership and say, okay, we need a new collective bargaining agreement with Penguin Random House, because that's just illegal right now. So SIFWA does what it can. RWA does what it can. The Horror Writers Association does what it can. National Writers Union, without full real union status, does what it can. The Freelancers Guild does what it can. But we have all of these different groups, none of which have the actual full power of a guild in the capital G way that WGA or SAG-AFTRA has. And so we have individual groups that are advocating for their membership, usually by genre or by category. They don't have the full power of a union, so they can't do, a full strike. They can't do collective bargaining in any meaningful fashion. And so it's not surprising that compared to the prospects for an author in science fiction fantasy publishing, WGA looks like a dream job. And WGA's prospects, things have gotten so dire that their membership is striking, right? And yet, things are worse for authors, and we don't have recourse. But really, things are worse for authors because we don't have recourse. We have never been able to have a novelist strike, for better terms. We're not able to have a novelist strike to break the 25% net royalty on ebooks Rubicon. Jay Kaysen, etc., or however that screen name is. HBO started licensing shows to Netflix. I have to assume that's some horrible loophole that shrinks the residuals. Yeah, I wonder if that's the case, right? If it's like a third-party sale, do part of the residuals go to HBO instead? This is like in publishing where if I sell audio to a publisher and then they sub-license it to someone else, the publisher gets part of that license money and then the author gets the rest of that license money. If I, via my agent, license my audio rights directly to somebody like Dreamscape, like I did for Annihilation Aria, then I get a larger percentage of that money because the publisher doesn't get any percentage because they didn't get that audio rights. They have no right to any of that money. So Alphabet Stream says, I mean, professional writer was my dream job, but the prospect of doing it for a living was dubious when I first went to college, and now I just don't even know anymore. I have a hard time having any motivation at all to even try. I totally understand, given the way things are right now and the last few years that a lot of us have had. I understand. It has been really hard to stay motivated because it seems like things are just getting worse and worse and worse, and writers are getting screwed, are getting pressed and squeezed more and more and more, and we don't really have recourse, right? Because like I can write to my Congress people and say, hey, we really need to amend labor law so that authors and other types of freelancers can organize. And the GOP Senate's never going to let that happen because they hate labor. Right? The GOP's policy position, if I can paraphrase, is lol, simply die. Right? The GOP has no respect for labor. They are bootlicking, don't step on me, daddy, right? They are either rich enough to be the ones dictating those terms, or they are beholden really only to those richest people who control capital, who have all of the money, who have all of the stocks, who have access to all of the like major resources, who own the companies. And so to get the political change necessary to modify labor laws, it's going to take a lot of work. But here's what I take as encouragement, right? I take the fact that WGA and SAG-AFTRA are on strike in a historic combined or double strike that hasn't happened since like 1960. It's been that long since WGA and SAG-AFTRA were on strike together. We are seeing an incredible unionization and labor wave across the country in a variety of industries. There's been unionization in media companies that hasn't kept a lot of freelancers from getting screwed over, but it's made things a bit better. We have seen unionization in Starbucks stores. We've seen unionization in Amazon warehouses. We've seen unionization and labor action among teachers and educators and grad students. We're on the verge of a potential UPS Teamsters strike because UPS delivery people are just dying in their trucks from overwork and overheat because of global warming, because of corporate greed, and everything ties back together, right? The shitty rich people who own or run any of the AMPTP companies are the same kind of people, and in some cases, literally the same people as the people who own and run Starbucks, Amazon, any of these groups. Because There's a tiny, tiny percentage of the world's population that has a vast, preposterous amount of the world's money and capital. And so all of these fights are one fight. And so doing what we can to support WGA and SAG-AFTRA, to support the UPS Teamsters, to support whatever local labor organizing is happening in your neighborhood, all of these fights support one another. SAG-AFTRA is more likely to get the terms that they want because WGA is striking at the same time, because WGA and SAG-AFTRA are teaming up in their strike actions and picket lines to shut down productions. And so even if you're not in a union, there are things that you can do to help. You know, we can make donations to the Entertainment Community Fund, which I'm going to link again here. The Entertainment Community Fund is a support fund for workers in related industries who are impacted by these shutdowns. So this is not the fund to go and feed WGA members or SAG-AFTRA members. This is an act of solidarity and mutual aid from these striking organizations, these striking guilds, to their colleagues, because these guilds know that when they go on strike, it impacts productions, and that impacts other workers in related fields within the industry, right? They know that one part of the industry shutting down productions impacts other people. And so as an act of solidarity, everything that I've seen from WGA and SAG-AFTRA members has been, please donate to the Entertainment Community Fund. There are ways to send food or other direct support to WGA, and I imagine to SAG-AFTRA as well. If you want to be involved beyond donating to the emergency, the Entertainment Community Fund, or beyond, well, I'll break it down. If you want to be involved beyond that fund, you can go to the websites for SAG-AFTRA and WGA, and you can look at their strike kind of Q&A, and there may be a place where you can, there will be a place where you can see where the pickets are happening, and you can go and join a picket line. You just go find whoever the captain or whoever the leader of the picket line is, and introduce yourself and say, how can I help? Where do you want me? You may be able to see captains on social media saying, hey, we need bodies at this place. And if you're nearby, you can go and help. You might see that people need ice or people need water because we're in a really hot summer, like a record hot summer in a lot of places, right? And so being on a picket line all day in Southern California in the sun can be really exhausting and dangerous health-wise. Same thing, honestly, even in New York, right? Like Southern California is more known as a sunny place, but it gets real hot and humid in New York in the summer. I speak from experience. You know, I'm hot and humid down here in Baltimore. So you can get involved directly, you know, with your, you know, putting your body on the picket line. But if that's not viable, or that's not something that fits for your life or your schedule, spreading the word always helps. Writing to your legislators, asking them to speak out in support of a guild is useful. If you want to write to your legislators and encourage them to consider legislation about allowing freelancers to unionize, that would be great. You know, tell people about the stream. More importantly, give people the SAG resources, the SAG-AFTRA resources. Find those interviews with WGA and SAG-AFTRA members where they're talking from their own experience and leadership are speaking in their capacity as leaders for the membership. Listen to or watch those discussions and spread the word about those so that people can hear directly from the workers and the organizers to get the story in their terms so that folks can understand what's going on. So that is going to be that. I have a thing to do in 15 minutes, so I am going to end the stream so I can get ready for that thing. Thank you so much to Alphabet Streams and Jay Kaysen, etc., and everybody else who has been here hanging out. So tonight I am streaming. Do I have a Valor command? I do have a Valor command. Great. So IGM, a Court of Blades series called Valor, which is a selection for the New Jersey Web Fest and the Minnesota Web Fest this year. We're very excited. That is over at twitch.tv/Arvin Elleron. Tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern. It will be a downtime episode, but it also has a lot of like follow through and aftermath from the last session, where we were joined by guest star Darcy Little Badger and her cool new character. So if you haven't seen the show, I will do my best to make tonight a decent jumping on point, and you can ask questions in the chat, and there are people who've been watching the whole series and they will try to help you. We would love to have you there. If you can't watch live, the VODs show up on YouTube at youtube.com/Arvin Elleron about 24 hours later, or you can watch it later on Twitch. If you want other information about Speculate, the actual play show that I do, you can go to speculatesf.com. And if you want to see more about me, my website is michaelrunderwood.com, and you can support my work at patreon.com/michaelrunderwood. And I get more of the support there than I would from Twitch subs here, just straight up. So if you feel so inclined to throw some money my way, Patreon is a better way of doing that for me. But you can also support what I do by telling people about it, spreading the word, reading, watching things that I do, telling people that you like the things that I do, telling me if you like the things that I do, because that is a big morale boost to me. So with all of that taken care of, thanks again to everybody who's watching live, and thanks to anybody who is watching on VOD, on Twitch or YouTube or wherever. And solidarity forever. This is where I would queue up the song Solidarity Forever or Which Side Are You On? But I don't have the license to those, so I'm not going to do that. Thank you, Kids Are Asleep. And I will see folks, ideally, tonight over on twitch.tv/Arvin Elleron for Valorword. And if not, I'll see you around. Bye. Here's my ending.